Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about geometry, creation, loading, importing, and manipulation within Inspire. Inspire is not a CAD program, and it does not aspire to be a CAD program, but the geometry capabilities within Inspire are actually quite extensive for a finite element analysis tool. Whether we're talking about bringing in geometry from existing CAD or creating geometry within Inspire or just simply editing, changing the geometry, making it more prone to be a good design space. Uh, Inspire has the capabilities within it to do all of those things. So when we talk about bringing geometry in, that's going to be done through File and Open. Inspire considers all forms of geometry to be Inspire files. We don't want to discriminate against any form of geometry, so we don't even import it. We just open it straight up. And as you can see from this list here, we support essentially all of the major CAD packages within Inspire, as well as the third-party transfer languages of IGES, Parasolid, and STEP. So however you want to bring your geometry in, you can bring it in. The closer you are to the native CAD data, obviously, the better you are. So this is a Parasolid file, and as you can see, it opens right up within Inspire, and now we have information in the model browser here about that. Inspire will respect the organization of your CAD geometry. So any organization that you did within your CAD system will be maintained in Inspire as well. Well, Inspire is not a CAD tool. It has some great geometry creation utilities. Well, it's typically always best to generate your geometry within a CAD program. I think you'll find it substantially easier within the CAD program you're most familiar with. The creation of geometry within Inspire is actually pretty easy. It works on this sketching concept. So if we come to our geometry and we take a look at all of the different ways that we can create things, we can see here I can create a rectangle in 3 different manners. So I'm going to come here. It will put a grid on the screen here, and that grid will be in whatever unit I specify, and I can just drag a rectangle there. And from here, I can edit the values of this. So say I want it 100 by 200 millimeters. And I get that right there. Now I'm still in the sketching, so I can right click to get out of that, and I can add other features to it. Or if I right click again, I end up with now just a rectangular surface, but it automatically puts me into push-pull mode, so I can take and I can extrude that out into 3D, make it whatever I want, and now I have my piece of geometry. Now with this geometry here, I can begin to edit it. If I need to make features on that, I can sketch directly on this geometry. So maybe we'll make a circle here. I'll come to the circle, center, and point, and now it asks me to define a sketching plane, and I'm going to pick one of the planes on my geometry, on my rectangle here. And now I'm sketching on that plane, and I will sketch that directly on the rectangle, the cube that I created. And it again puts me directly into push-pull. So I can take and drag that out, create kind of an embossment on it, or if I drag it through, I drill a hole down through the part. With that hole there, if I come to the push-pull and I click on that hole, I can drag the size of that, or I can put in a value so I can change the diameter of that hole to whatever I want it to be. I can even come here to the move faces, select that hole, and move that hole or even angle it to any orientation that I want. And if I move that off of the geometry, you see it begins to cut off the geometry, but that will work as well. So I can manipulate my geometry however I want it to do. And of course, we always have our undo to bring it back to whatever we want it to be. Now, if I need to create a new part, say I want another block sitting on top of this, I can again come to sketch on top of this, but now the important part here is to click this create new part. If I click create new part, I'm still sketching on that face and I'm still creating this rectangle, but if I extrude this up, you'll see this is now part 2 and part 1. So while these are in contact, I have created a brand new part. So that's the important feature, or the important thing to do if you need to create a brand new part, is to make sure you click that create new part. I can create more complex designs within Inspire by using the Polylines tool. So if I come up here to Polyline, again, it's going to ask me for a grid, or it's going to give me a grid. And now I can begin to create a shape. So I can come through and sketch whatever shape that I want. So essentially, if you kind of map out the shape that you want on some sort of grid, knowing the location of each one of the vertices, I can come through and sketch this out into any shape that I want. And then when I'm done, I just need to make sure that I reconnect with that initial point. Right click to get out of the sketching. And now I have that complex geometry, and I can take and extrude that into that shape right there. So as long as I can sketch it, I can create it within Inspire. We've talked briefly about push-pull already. You recall that after I create some sort of sketch, we'll do my rectangle again right here, it automatically enters me into the push-pull mode, and I can extrude that out into 3 dimensions. But even once I have geometry already created, I can come back to push-pull, and I can grab this, and I can go through and change that right there. As a little bit of a tip, sometimes it is helpful to turn off your snaps when you're doing push-pull. You'll notice as I'm kind of pushing along, depending upon where my cursor is, I'm inadvertently grabbing some snaps. So oftentimes I'll come down here and I'll just turn off my snaps, and it just allows for a bit of a smoother interaction with the push-pull. So once I have the push-pull done, I can edit any of these faces. But you'll notice here, not only we have the linear push-pull, I also have a revolve push-pull. And with the revolve push-pull, what I can do is select that, and you see the very first thing it asks is a face, line, or edge to revolve. So I'll grab that, and now it asks for an axis to revolve about. So I'll grab that, and now I'm actually going to revolve that around. So this is useful for creating curved shapes. Or I use this a lot to create spheres within Inspire. If you need to create a sphere, very simple. Just come here and new. I come and I create an arc. And I do a nice 180-degree arc. And then I'll come to my, let me turn my snaps back on. And then I'll come to the line and select that. And now when I come to the revolve, I'll select that, and I'll select my axis of rotation, 360 degrees, and I get a nice sphere there. So that's the best way to create a sphere within Inspire. Another really useful feature for push-pull is to kind of shape or contour your part. So what I like to do, say I want to trim this to kind of a point there, I can come here and come to my line, and I'll come to my sketch, and I'll sketch on this face right here. We'll actually come, I really like the snaps. I can snap from the midpoint here to the midpoint there, and then from the midpoint here to the midpoint there, and then right click to get out of it, right click to get out again. I have those sketches on here, and now if I push pull those, you'll see I can take that to a point right there. So by sketching things onto the face, it doesn't just have to be a circle or something like that to create a notch in there. I can actually create a linear sketch on there and use that to shape or contour my part. Now, once I'm in the push-pull, I can also come here, and you'll notice that with an angled face, it will pull out to a sharp point. Another thing that I can do is to come in here and say I want to make kind of like a little notch in here. I can sketch on this face, sketch that. I don't have to take my push-pull all the way through. And again, this might be a good time to turn off the snap. So I can take and I can just bring that down through, take it to the depth that I want, and create just kind of that little pocket inside there as well. Another particularly useful tool within the geometry in Inspire is the mirror function. So if there's some symmetry to your part, don't waste your time sketching out the entire thing. Just create half of it, and then I can come to the mirror. And if I just leave it as is, if I select a plane, it'll automatically determine what part that plane is associated with, and it will mirror it. And then I have the option of keeping the original or just flipping it. So if I turn off keep the original is on by default. If I turn that off, it's just going to take my original and flip it to the other side. Whereas if I keep original on, it will keep both of them. And then another nifty little feature here is instance. And it's probably best just to show you what instance does. So if I select instance and I click mirror, you'll see it will copy it. But now watch what happens if I come here to push pull and I grab this and I begin to move it. You'll see because I created an instance, when I have an instance of another part, anything that I do to either of them is automatically done on the other. Really useful if you truly have a symmetric part and you need to make some manipulations. It'll save you some time on manipulating both parts. Now, one thing to be aware of is when you do have an instance, it really does do anything to the other instance. In version 2020, we do now have the ability to come here and say break instance, which can be useful to guarantee that if you need to change something and you don't want it to be reflected on the other side, you can click break instance. And once that instance is broken, if I come here, I can manipulate it and it will no longer do anything to the other instance. Inspire also supports the standard Boolean operations. So in the geometry page, I can come to Boolean. You can see we have combine, subtract, and intersect. Relatively self-explanatory, but just to kind of give you an idea of what they do. In this case, I have two different parts. If I do combine, I just select the parts I want to combine. I click combine, and now this has become one single part. Undoing that, and then coming to subtract, I select my target, and then I select my tool, and you can see it gives me a little preview of what I'm going to end up with. And the reason why it looks like that is because by default, Keep Tools is off. So it will just take that notch out of that block there. If I select Keep Tools, then I maintain both of my parts. But if I come here and hide that, you see I still have that notch out of my part, but my cylinder is maintained as well. Let me undo that. And come back here to Boolean. Finally, intersect. Intersect, I select my target. I select my tool. And you'll see the default now is to just maintain what is in red, which is just the intersection between those parts. So I get this kind of weird shaped pie wedge type piece here. If I keep the target, then I'll keep the block and that little pie wedge shape. If I keep the tools, I keep the cylinder in the pie wedge shape. Or if I keep both, what I'm going to end up with when I click intersect is actually now three parts, which are going to be this block without that notch in there, the cylinder without the notch in there, and then the notch. So you can see there's my cylinder without the notch, my block without the notch, and then finally the notch. So pretty standard for Boolean operations, but just a little rundown of what those three things can do for you. The cut function within Inspire is essentially exactly what it sounds like. It cuts the parts, and it is far and away my favorite tool within Inspire, not necessarily because it does anything special functionality-wise. I just really like the icon there, the little indication. So we get this little buzz saw here. And what the buzz saw will do is it will end up on any part or on any face that you select or any edge, it will end up perpendicular to that. And it will adhere to snap. So if I want to cut this exactly in half, I can select that edge, have it snap to the middle, click, and it will give me that. And if I click cut, you see I now end up with two pieces, and this is exactly cut in half. Let me undo that. Oops. And there we go. So let me grab this again, and I'll grab that. Now, once I have that cut plane there, I can actually orient it however I want it to be, or I can come here to my manipulation, and I can manipulate that as well and shift that in any orientation that I want, and then it will not cut until I select cut, and now I get that there. I can also use I can use a feature to cut another feature. So let me come here and let's do push-pull here. Let me shrink that down right there. So if I come here to cut and I just lay that on there, it's going to try to cut the part that plane is associated with, which is going to essentially do nothing because that plane is right on the edge of the part. But what I can do is I can come here to targets, and I can select this as my target, and then select this as my plane, and you'll see now it will use the plane defined with this part right here to cut that part. When I select cut, I now end up with three different parts. So I can alter different geometry from the geometry that I'm using to define my cut plane. To bring these back together, I can either do undo, or I can come here to my Boolean combine. So I'll select my three parts here, I'll combine them, and we'll get that back, and now it's one piece. You will notice that we do have these original cut lines on there. We'll get to the simplify in the next section here, but just to show you real quick, if I come here to simplify and imprints, it will find all the imprints and remove them. The Simplify tools in the Geometry section of Inspire are particularly useful when we're setting up a design space. In fact, the tools that we have here are often easier to use than your CAD package. So within Simplify, you're going to find imprints, rounds, holes, and plug. Imprints are a way of you removing, say, scratches off of a part. So if I come here to my line, and I'll just draw a line on that part right there and get out of here. If I come here to simplify imprints, you see it highlights that, and if I click remove all, that goes away. So if you have lines on your parts, you need to just get rid of them. Imprints will do that. Rounds are the easiest and quickest way to get rid of fillets in your part. So if I come here, it's going to identify them. And I can either click them individually or click remove all, and it will get rid of all of the rounds and straighten that out. Again, used primarily when we're setting up a design space. We don't want those small round features in there. Holes are a convenient way of getting rid of holes. It will identify them, and again, I can click them individually or remove all. So if I click that, it goes away. It can also be used to get rid of pockets. A lot of times it won't automatically find the pocket, though. So the easiest way to deal with it then is to just double-click on the bottom face of the pocket. It will highlight that. I get my little check mark there, and I can fill in that pocket. Plug works in a very similar way to the holes. And in fact, it will work on the same features that holes work on. And again, I can come here to that and select it. But what plug will do is it will fill it in, but you see it has created a separate part here. So now I've got the plug there. Another thing that plug is particularly useful for is creating like a negative space. If you want to create a shape that is the interior of some other part, plug will do that for you. So those are the Simplify tools. Again, used mostly when we're setting up a design space. And again, you'll find that these tools can actually save you a ton of time over going and doing this in your CAD package. Partition is another tool that's used primarily when we're setting up our optimization. And in this case, it's used for designing non-design or describing non-design spaces. So if I come here to partition, it will identify holes, and I can partition all. And I can do the partition all or select them manually. And if I select that, it will indicate the thickness of the partition that I want. So I can set that for whatever I want it to be. And when I right click, it will take and create a new part based around that. So now if I were doing an optimization, I could right click on this, select design space, and that would preserve my hole as a non-design space. But it's not limited strictly to circular features or features like that. I can select any feature for a partition. So if I select this face, for instance, and I click partition, it will partition back, and that can allow me to save that face. I can even do it on individual features. So say there was a small feature on here where maybe something else was intersecting. I could draw the shape of that feature. We'll do it as a polyline. So I could say, okay, I want this, 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 and that. And now, since this is going to be identified as this individual surface there, if I come to partition and I select that and I partition that, I'll get that cut in there as well. And if I right click and set this as design space, I can now save this as a non-design space partition. So while it will automatically find feature or holes, pockets, those sort of things, the partition can be used on any geometric feature that you need to separate out, again, primarily for establishing non-designed versus design space when setting up an optimization. The mid-surface tool within Inspired Geometry is a way of generating a middle surface off of your solid geometry. So if you would rather do your analysis or optimization on a mid-surface as opposed to a thin solid, mid-surface is the tool for you. Just simply come to my mid-surface. I select the part, and it will automatically find the middle plane. The default is, of course, to put it at the mid plane, but I can specify to put it at either side 1 or side 2 if I want it actually on the surface of the part, or I can come back and select the mid surface there. And when I click extract, it will get rid of the original solid geometry, and now I'm going to end up with the surface geometry that I could do my analysis or topological optimization on from that. Last but definitely not least, we have our fillets option here. With fillets, we can do either circular fillets or round fillets, or we can do chamfers. Now, they both work exactly the same way. If I come here to my fillet, I can select an edge, and it will put a fillet on there. I can define the radius of that fillet, and then I can continue to add edges to that. So as I add edges, it will blend them together. In fact, I'll get that nice rounded corner there if I select those edges. And I could even come here and select all the edges, and then I will get it, and I'll even get the nice fillet on these holes here. And when I click fillet all, I can round that out nicely. And then we also know that simplify, I can come to rounds and remove all those. And I'll do that because now I want to come to chamfer. So if I come to chamfer, it works exactly the same way as fillet, and then I pick an edge. But now what I get, this value right here, is the depth of the fillet. So if I say 10, that's going to be 10 millimeters off of the corner. And then I can define the angle of that as well. So the default is 45, so I get a nice 45 fillet, but I can change the angle, and it will change that as well. And just like I could with the rounded fillet, I can select that, and I can get a chamfer going through there, and I can chamfer my part as well.